There was no point in trying to figure out what made this guy tick. Jin-Woo couldn't help but smile as he watched Jin-Cho bounce with excitement over their latest haul. He glanced toward the conference room and asked, "Who's in there?" His assistant looked up a bit startled, and said, "Oh, I was supposed to tell you earlier there's someone here applying for a job. Boss." Jin-Woo's eyes widened in surprise. "An applicant? Really? Who is it?" He pressed on. The assistant replied simply, "The person waiting in the conference room, boss." Jin-Woo found this puzzling and decided to check things out himself. He pushed open the door and stepped inside. Inside, a woman was sipping the canned coffee Jin-Yo had quickly grabbed from the nearby convenience store, since there wasn't anything in the office. She turned toward Jin-Woo. "What are you doing here?" Jin-Woo asked, stunned. Han looked up calmly. "Well, I wanted to join the guild." Jin-Woo couldn't believe what he was hearing. Jin-Woo thought he must have misheard. How could Han Chao want to join a brand new guild? She's vice president of Korea's top guild and super powerful. It didn't make sense, so Jin-Woo figured someone was making her do it. The thing was, who could possibly boss Han Chao around? Only one person in Korea could tell her what to do like this. Did President Go of the association put you up to this? Han looked confused when Jin-Woo mentioned President Go. Why would he? Jin-Woo was totally confused, but Han seemed even more puzzled. "Okay, I need to chill." This was definitely a shocking and interesting twist, but Jin-Woo calmly pulled out a chair and sat down across from Han. Jin-Woo watched her quietly for a moment, really focused. To him, time felt like it was moving slower as he pieced together all the clues about Haonan. She seemed nervous, her heartbeat, breathing, and eyes gave her away. Even though she tried to keep a straight face, Jin-Woo noticed everything because of his sharp senses. But there was something that didn't make sense. Why was she trying so hard to join the solo play guild when she was still part of the Hunters Guild? "You're still under contract with the Hunters Guild, aren't you?" Jin-Woo asked. Normally hunters sign contracts with guilds for 5 years, and those deals are hard to break. Han was super talented. She'd even earned the top rank of S-Class when she became a hunter 2 years ago. With her 5-year deal, she still had 3 more years to go. Han casually dropped, "But here's the thing, I could totally afford to pay the penalty if I wanted out early." Jin-Woo's eyebrows shot up in surprise. "Breaking a contract would cost you 2 or 3 times your signing bonus. If the Hunters Guild paid big bucks to get someone as skilled as you on board, the penalty must be huge, like life-changing money." Jin-Woo suddenly sounded all business. "Our guild, Solo Play, can't offer a signing bonus that matches your level," he said frankly. "Wait, is the guild really called Solo Play?" someone asked in surprise. "Yes, that's the name the vice president and I decided on," Jin-Woo replied casually. "Do you have an issue with it?" "No, not at all." As Han let out a quiet sigh and continued, "I don't mind. I'm fine with not getting a signing bonus." Jin-Woo's eyes narrowed in suspicion. Why would she agree to such a huge fee just to leave the hunters? What was she planning now? Han and Jin-Woo locked eyes for what felt like forever, but she finally had to look away. Her heartbeat went into overdrive. Jin-Woo's sharp ears picked up on every tiny change in her breathing, her posture, everything. Is she hiding something? Since things were already this intense, Jin-Woo decided to cut to the chase. "Why are you so desperate to join our guild?" he asked point blank. Han's lips tightened, and she stayed silent. Just like Jin-Woo had suspected, she didn't have an easy answer. Jin-Woo could tell something was up. Her cheeks were getting redder by the second, and he was pretty sure she wasn't telling him everything. He thought back to how strange Harin had acted at the funeral. She'd been quiet and distant, like she was hiding a secret. Whatever her plan was, it seemed like she'd been thinking about it for a while. Jin-Woo waited for her to explain, but she just kept her head down, not saying a word. What could she possibly be keeping to herself? Even though the giant ant had knocked her out cold, she could somehow still sense Jin-Woo right there with her. As she tumbled into the darkness, his familiar scent brought her comfort like a warm hug when she needed it most. There just weren't any words to explain how she'd felt in that moment. She knew if she tried to tell anyone about it, they'd probably think she was nuts. But then when she later found out Jin-Woo had actually been on the island the whole time, her heart practically stopped. How did she even begin to make sense of all this? She felt a giant sigh of relief knowing it wasn't just her imagination running wild. Then an unexpected thought popped into her head. If In a 1 in a million chance she ever found herself in a situation where there was no way out, she'd want Jin-Woo to be right there with her. I wish you could stay with me until the very end, she thought, though saying something so sappy made her face turn bright red, even just thinking about it. Hyun wasn't exactly the romantic type, so saying something like that felt totally out of her league. Instead, she went with a response she had ready. She finally looked up and locked eyes with him. I'd like a simpler life. This wasn't entirely true, but it wasn't a complete lie either. The truth was, Hyun couldn't stand the smell of other hunters. It drove her crazy. But being around Jin-Woo was different. He made her feel at ease. That's what she meant by simpler. Jin-Woo didn't exactly pick up on what she was really saying, but her words still made sense to him. He nodded, understanding. He thought she was saying that joining a smaller group would make her life simpler compared to being in a big one. Like the hunters, Hyun was probably just 22 or 23, which seemed pretty young to handle the tough job of an S-rank hunter. The constant danger, especially after what happened on Jeju Island, must have made things even harder for her. Jin-Woo himself had felt like quitting so many times when he worked with the association, so he totally got how Haemin felt. He felt sorry for her, but he just couldn't bring himself to accept her into his guild. Jin-Woo wanted their guild to be called the Solo Play. For a reason, he planned on tackling every dungeon they booked by himself. Jin-Woo had asked Jinyo to find someone to fill the quota, just like they did with the C-rank dungeons, because there was no way around the rule requiring a minimum number of members. All of this was part of his plan to level up. However, letting Haeyeon join the guild would only cause problems. Even if she didn't want a signing bonus, they'd still have to pay her a salary, right? Signing an S-rank hunter, who wouldn't even have anything to do, would be a waste of resources for the country. But then Jin-Woo thought, what if I just turn her down without a good reason? That would look really suspicious, especially since she's not asking for a signing bonus. So Jin-Woo came up with a clever idea. Actually, there's a test to join our guild. Jin-Woo cut in before Han could finish. We only started doing this recently, so the vice president must have forgotten to add it to the job listing. Han's expression turned serious. What kind of test is it? She asked. Jin-Woo was taken aback. He'd expected her to get upset or even walk away at the idea of a test. But here she was, asking questions like it was no big deal. Is she serious? Yet, he thought. Most people would have stormed out by now. And yet there she was, doing the exact opposite. It seemed like he'd actually fired up her competitive side instead. Jin-Woo could tell by her calm expression that there was a fiery determination burning beneath the surface. Was she one of those people who never backed down from a challenge? Or was she just being stubborn? Either way, Jin-Woo couldn't back out now and pretend it was all a joke. You have to battle a minion of my choosing, he said, laying down the gauntlet. That clearly struck a nerve. Is that really what you think of me? Hunter Jin-Woo sung. It was weird. Jin-Woo could practically hear her saying those words, even though her face didn't give anything away. They just stood there, locked in a silent stare down. Which minion are you going to pick? Jin-Woo asked. I'll choose one. That's super strong. Just for you, Hunter Chad, she replied with a smirk. He shrugged. Works for me. She didn't back down. But Heaven had no idea what she was up against. Jin-Woo knew she was super competitive. So he figured once she realized she was beaten, she'd admit defeat and move on. That's why he agreed to her challenge. Alright, then, he said casually. When does this test happen? How about right now? There wasn't time to waste. Forming the guild was urgent. And Jin-Woo didn't want to spend any more time than necessary dealing with Hunter Chas. Well, since they were already talking about it, they might as well get it over with. The place would be the gym at the Hunters Association headquarters. S-rank hunters could use it whenever they wanted. It was one of their cool perks. Got it, Hain said, nodding. She didn't want to wait any longer either. They stood up at the same time, like they had planned it all along. Jin-Woo stopped Hain just as she was about to turn the doorknob. Hain, wait a second, he said. Sure, what's up? We shouldn't go out that way, Jin-Woo replied. Hain looked confused. The room only had one door, and escaping through the window seemed super unlikely. Jin-Woo walked closer to her, his expression serious. There's an easier way to get there. Sorry. In order to do that, I have to stand close to you. Is that okay? Aim remembered something President Baek had once told her. It was about how Jin-Woo had suddenly appeared right behind him, when the Korean strike squad was in a really tight spot. Is he going to show me how he did that? Her heart skipped a beat as Jin-Woo's face came closer than she expected. Excuse me, Jin-Woo said softly, and then he gently put his arms around her. He had given her a piggyback ride around the ant cave earlier, so when Jin-Woo wrapped his arms around Hyun in a warm hug, it felt pretty normal to him. But Hyun's face lit up like a tomato, as she blushed deeply. Despite her embarrassment, she didn't pull away, or try to wriggle free. What a nice scent, Hyun thought. Her cheeks burning, Jin-Woo tightened his grip gently around her waist, making sure she was secure in his arms. He had something important to try out, and now seemed like the perfect moment. You might feel dizzy, he warned. It happened to me the first time I did this. Hyun nodded bravely, her voice barely above a whisper as she replied. Okay. Jin-Woo stared ahead, his eyes focused on what was coming next. Without saying a word, he activated the skill they had been waiting for. Shadow exchange. Hyun, 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 Hyun. In an instant, Jin-Woo and Hyun vanished into the shadows, leaving nothing but silence behind them. At that exact moment, Jin-Ho walked into the room with tea and snacks he'd grabbed quickly from the convenience store when he noticed the meeting was running late. Help yourself to Thor, he started to say, but then he made eye contact with a high orc shadow soldier who looked super embarrassed. As Jin-Ho dropped the tray in shock, shattering the glasses everywhere. What the far? He exclaimed, scared out of his wits. He squeezed his eyes shut for a second, but when he opened them again, the shadow soldier was gone. But I definitely saw, he thought, confused. He rubbed his eyes hard, shook his head, and looked around. But there was no sign of the magic beast anywhere. Have I been pushing myself too hard lately? Am I hallucinating now? Atsuki tilted his head in confusion, then turned to grab a rag to clean up the mess, only to freeze completely. Where did the boss and Hunter Cha go? Meanwhile, Jin-Woo faded into the shadows, watching as Hyun experienced the exact same strange thing. I knew it. Jin-Woo's suspicion had been right all along. After using Shadow Exchange a bunch of times, he figured out what this skill really did, and it turned out he was totally onto something. They had just gone through the shadow together, which meant Shadow Exchange wasn't just some random trick. It actually created a sort of gate. The way it worked was pretty cool. The shadow on the ground acted like a doorway, and where you came out depended on where a soldier was standing. So basically the soldier's location set the exit point for their journey through the shadows. The fact that he could actually create a gate, even if he had to wait 3 hours between uses, was seriously mind-blowing. Just think about it. With this power, Jin-Woo could zip across the planet and back again every few hours like it was no big deal. Jin-Woo's eyes widened in disbelief as this revelation hit him. But his amazement didn't last forever. The darkness faded into light, and in no time Jin-Woo and Haoring reached the gym. Jin-Woo had left something behind, a shadow, to help him return quickly if needed. Click, click, click. The lights flickered on as the sensors detected their magical energy. Even with her eyes closed, Anne could feel the light shining through. When she finally opened them, her jaw dropped in shock. How? She muttered. Completely blown away. She knew this place like the back of her hand, but everything around her felt different, like it had all changed in an instant. How was this possible? Anne had no idea such a thing could even exist. Her eyes widened in shock as she glanced around, her gaze finally landing on Jin-Woo. She wanted to ask him so many things, but didn't know where to start. They were standing way too close for a normal conversation anyway. Jin-Woo let go of her wrist and waist, stepping back slightly with a small smile. You're safe now, he said softly. No need to hang on, Jin-Woo said. Hems nodded silently, rubbing her wrist where he had gripped it tightly. Let's start. Jin-Woo stepped away from the corner where his high orc soldier had been hiding and moved toward the center of the gym. Yes, Hems replied, joining him. But as she did, she suddenly realized something. She'd left her sword in her car. Even though it was super important for her job, bringing a sword to an interview just didn't seem right. She explained that to him. I left my weapon in the car, she said. Wait, you mean the pickaxe? He replied with a grin. Hyun's face turned red. What are you talking about? She asked, trying to play it cool. Oh, come on. You know exactly what I'm talking about, he teased. Like that time in the High Orc dungeon. Remember? You were swinging that thing around like it was nobody's business. Hyun's cheeks burned as a mortifying memory popped into her head, one she'd totally forgotten about until now. No, my weapon is, she caught on when he burst out laughing. Jin-Woo waved his hand dismissively as her face turned bright red. Gotcha. Just messing with you. But now what? Hound was super tough and all, but taking down a trained soldier with just her bare hands. Not gonna happen. Jin-Woo really wanted his soldier to win, but he also didn't want her getting hurt. Don't worry about it, Hee-seon said, glancing toward the equipment room of the gym. They must have something I can use. Jin-Woo's eyes lit up with curiosity. Hee-seon walked over to the door and swiped her hunter's license on the keycard reader next to it. The door opened, revealing all sorts of cool weapons lined up neatly inside. Jin-Woo couldn't believe his eyes. This was way more than he expected from the Hunters Association. He had always wondered where his membership dues went, but now it made total sense. They were definitely putting that money to good use. Hyeon stepped inside and came out with a sword almost as long as her own. I'm ready, she said confidently. Jin-Woo raised an eyebrow. Are you sure that's the right one for you? He asked, eyeing the weapon in her hand. Yeah, right. It's not like magic beasts care what weapon you're using, Hyeon said, shaking her head. I could fight with anything. It wouldn't make a difference. Jin-Woo didn't argue. He actually agreed with her. He liked how straightforward she was. Time to bring in some backup, he muttered to himself, as if proving she was totally ready. Hang let out a burst of her mana. Jin-Woo knew that if he called up just a regular soldier she'd destroy it in seconds, so he went with his best move. Come out, he said. A dark shape stepped away from Jin-Woo and took form. A sleek knight stood there, its black armor shining, and on top of its helmet was a wild fiery red mane that fell down to its waist. The knight didn't make a sound as it moved into place beside Jin-Woo. In Jin-Woo's shadow army, there was a man named Igris who was known as the greatest swordsman. I had promised Hunter Cha that I would call upon my strongest warrior, but then something held me back. Jin-Woo hesitated to summon Baru, knowing it might be too much. Every single member of the Korean team still feared what Baru once was, before he became one of Jin-Woo's shadow soldiers. Even Hadrison had come close to death at his hands in the past. Jin-Woo didn't want to scare her badly, so summoning the shadow ant was off the table. Fang wasn't an option either, using him in the gym could end in flames. That left Igris as Jin-Woo's best bet. He glanced at Igris's towering frame and felt sure he'd made the right call. Mr. Sung, In-sen said suddenly, her voice cold enough to chill the air. Jin-Woo hesitated. Had he picked the wrong minion? He thought for a moment before suggesting, how about we do this? If my minion gets destroyed or you give up, that's how we'll decide who wins. In-sen nodded, her expression unreadable, and pulled out a sword from the equipment room. The test was on. Hyeon held a blade that wasn't anything special. It was the kind you could easily find anywhere. But in her hands, it looked powerful because of her skill. She's definitely strong. Jin-Woo noticed that Hain, who stood among the top S-rank hunters, was ready to give it everything she had. Igris, meanwhile, whipped out his twin swords, one in each hand, and prepared for action. Jin-Woo had a feeling that Igris might actually lose to Hyeon. But then, wait a minute, she said, the weapon doesn't matter. Right? Jin-Woo smiled and addressed Hyeon. Could you please turn around for a second? Hyeon was baffled, but turned as requested without protest. Jin-Woo took the Demon Monarch's sword from his inventory and handed it to Igris. Use this. She'd said it didn't matter what kind of weapon she used, so that should also mean it didn't matter what her opponent used. Igris was so moved that the master himself would grant him a sword that he was about to kneel in gratitude. But Jin-Woo abruptly stopped him. I told you you don't need to be so formal all the time. If only Iron had at least half of Igris's manners. Alright, let's go. Jin-Woo called out to Hyeon. Hyeon turned around and froze when he saw Igris holding a sword buzzing with blue electricity. It wasn't there before. He stared in surprise. Are we starting? Jin-Woo asked. Acting like everything was normal, Hyeon hesitated for a moment before nodding. Okay. With that, Igris swung the glowing Demon Monarch's sword. FV Woom. A flash of lightning shot straight at Hyeon. She flinched but twisted her body back like a cat, dodging the attack just in time. Krak-rakum. The blast hit the wall, leaving a black scorch mark. Khan stood tall again, giving Jin-Woo a fierce look. But Jin-Woo looked away, acting like nothing was his fault. She silently tightened her grip on the sword with both hands. Meanwhile, Igris charged straight for her, moving super fast and determined to make her surrender. But Hein didn't flinch. She dove straight at Igris. President Go's office was on the top floor of the main building. From up there he could see everything. The other buildings in the association, and even the streets around them. He had been reading some secret papers when something outside caught his eye. The lights were on in the gym, but it was supposed to be empty. Confused, Gun-hee buzzed his secretary. "Did someone rent the gym today?" he asked. "I don't see any bookings, sir," she replied. Gun-hee covered the phone with his hand and stared at the gym, trying to figure out what was going on. Then he spoke quietly. "Turn on the surveillance cameras and show me the feed." Soon, the big TV in his office flickered to life, showing Jin-Woo and Hanin in the gym. Their arms were wrapped tightly around each other. Gun-hee's eyes widened in surprise. He cleared his throat, shocked by what he was seeing. He tilted his head. Are those two a thing? Now that he thought about it, when Hyen first arrived in the helicopter, the first person she asked about was Jin-Woo. He should have put two and two together earlier. Gun-hee couldn't help but smile as he watched the pair of hunters on the screen. Both of them hated being in the spotlight so much that they'd even asked to keep their personnel files sealed after becoming S-rank hunters. By this time, Jin-Woo and Hyen were household names in Korea. The only place they could hang out alone was at the association gym after hours. A date at the gym. That seemed pretty laid back for a couple like them. Gun-hee couldn't help but grin as he shook his head, clearly entertained by the whole thing. He called his secretary once more. "I'm sorry," he said, "but could you please turn off the surveillance cameras in the gym, sir?" "But," she replied uncertainly. "Just note in the records that there was a maintenance check today." "Understood, sir." As soon as he hung up the phone, the TV screen darkened slightly. Gun-hee stared at the gym for a moment. Then a small smile spread across his face. He shook his head and dove back into his reports. Then, Arsar blood. The water in Go's glass wiggled a little as a small tremor shook the gym. He said without looking, still smiling like he knew something no one else did. "Oh, to be young again." Indeed. Breathed. Jin-Woo pressed his fingers against his temple. He was getting a headache. Hyen was turning out to be stronger than he'd expected. Even though Jin-Woo had given the Demon Monarch's sword to Igris, the knight was struggling against her. Finally, Jin-Woo called off the match when Hyen sliced off Igris' left arm. "Stop," he said sharply. While his soldiers could respawn, it wasn't easy watching them get destroyed like that. Hyen let out a deep breath to catch her breath. She'd won, but fighting Igris had been tough. She was drenched in sweat. She wiped sweat from her forehead with a pale, thin finger. Jin-Woo called Igris back and admitted defeat. "I lost," he said. "VM." Igris returned to his shadow, but Hyen didn't lay down her sword. "No, this one doesn't count," she said. Jin-Woo looked confused. Was she saying the match didn't count? "Why?" Hyen kept going. "You promised to use your strongest minion, right?" She stepped closer, stopping just one step away from him. "That Black Knight, was he really your strongest?" It was a question she clearly didn't expect him to answer. He seemed totally sure about something, and just wanted Jin-Woo to agree. When Jin-Woo shook his head, Sri quickly replied, "Then call out your strongest monster like you said." "You would." Jin-Woo hesitated. "But what if you get hurt?" Sri smiled confidently. "I'm ready for a rematch." Jin-Woo looked shocked and asked, "How do you know about this?" Sri explained she had watched the raid video several times. "That fire minion reminded me of the High Orc Shaman, the tough boss from that A-rank dungeon." She figured Jin-Woo could probably control other monsters too, like that big ant.